Okay,
Okay,
this
looks like
is 3:30 on my counter.
440. Maybe.
Whatever.
Yeah, I don't
Hi.
know about
Oh, ah.
that.
Hi, I'm Ben Furman,
And I'm Nate Blyton.
and this is Patch In, the show from SoundNotion.tv dedicated to the wonderful world of electroacoustic music. Let's start with some news. So, obviously, we usually try and do this show monthly, and this is the second one in this month. So, there hasn't been a lot of news except for one little major update. Dorico Pro 2 is out. You can get it in both professional and elements versions, and holy crap, it is a big update. I have already switched over. Scoring Notes has a gigantic review, but here are the highlights. You can write Asias anywhere at any time in any voice, period. You can add and remove staves again anywhere in the score, either above or below any existing stave. This is really great if you're doing crazy stuff with divises, or if you have, say, a Ligeti type piano score and you suddenly need to have a third uh, staff. You can explode chords out to multiple parts really easily, and they've got a great demo on YouTube showing that. It's really kind of fun to watch. Or you can reduce an entire chorale section down to a single line. You can now do film score time signatures and get really big time signatures in your scores, either at the top of the very top staff or at every group throughout. There's a new system track that occurs above the top staff, and it lets you easily add or remove bars. Or if you hold Alt, you can select a quantity of time inside of a bar, duplicate it, select everything within that time quantity vertically, delete it, copy, whatever. This is possibly my new favorite tool in the program. You can also now create plain technique text and glyphs in the pro version. So I've already been doing this a lot, creating like pick sweeps for this piano part that I'm writing, and different things with mallets inside the piano. And you just select a glyph or import a graphic, maybe reverse it if you want it to be upside down if it's underneath the staff, and then you can apply CC numbers to it so that it will actually send it out to whatever library you're using for playback. And if it supports that technique text or CC, it will play that. You can now score videos and insert markers directly into the score, and it will auto calculate BPM based on your set markers, particularly the ones that you flag as important and whatever time signatures you've got in the score. That's really cool. Again, there's a video online on their website that you can check out. Extremely cool to watch and practice. Then play mode will also let you edit tempo, dynamics, and control changes, which pairs very nicely with the video feature. So you can have whatever crazy playback library you're using and automate the CC changes so that it jumps between pizzicato, Bartok pizzicato, uh, pizzicato using guitar picks, whatever. And then finally, this is something that I've wanted in a notation editor for probably 15, 16 years now, and it now has it. Freaking microtonal playback. And it works. It is 24 EDO only for now, but you specify that instead of 12 tone, and it will go through and you can put whatever microtonal accidental you want in there, or do a custom key signature with microtonal accidentals, and it will just flat out play them all out for you. It's great. Um, I will not confirm that after I tried it, I spent several minutes laughing with joy until I nearly passed out from a lack of oxygen. But this is something that I have wanted in a notation editor for years.
Yeah. I haven't quite gotten onto Dorico myself yet, but that might be enough of a reason just to have the experience of playing with microtonal playback like that.
Mhm. And
Um,
before anyone jumps on me, yes, I know that MuseScore has had microtonal accidentals for a long time. I know Sibelius has, and I know Finale has, but they haven't played back.
Mm.
And especially in the case of Finale, they are just a pain in the ass to set up.
Yeah. Well, there's obviously a lot new in Dorico too. Scoringnotes.com has a wonderful review of all of the new changes, and we'll have that in the show notes too. In slightly smaller news, Note Performer 3 is out, and now not just for Sibelius, it's also for Dorico Finale, and all for the low price of $129.
Yeah, I know a number of my students who use Sibelius have used Note Performer 1 and 2 for years, and it makes a difference in the playback. It doesn't sound as horrible as playing everything through the default ARIA player.
Yeah. So
But
something between that and using a crazy awesome sample library.
yeah,
They've got a good demonstration video of how it deals with dynamics and doesn't just play notes. It's nice, but yeah, just check it out.
wait, you mean it actually crossfades and
Yeah,
slurs?
right.
Whoa,
Yeah.
can't believe that.
Yeah.
But our guest today is a curator of lovely sounds who creates work as a composer and new media artist. His creative work explores the artistic possibilities at the intersection of human performance and creators and technological tools. He's also a lecturer and technical director of the Max Lab at Karma over at Stanford. So, welcome to Christopher Jetty.
Howdy. Thanks. Nice to be here.
Great to have you. So I'd like to start with your piece, Weemall or Wymall. We're not really sure how to pronounce it.
Either's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I just heard this at Seamus a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And this is a really, really cool piece because you have written this for Fifth Order Ambisonics.
Yeah. Yeah. So it started about 2 years ago. Myself and Fernando Lopez Lascano had the idea of taking what was a perfectly functional 16.8 playback system and turning it into a 56.8 playback system so that we could support higher order ambisonics playback in the concert space at Karma. This consumed many, many hours, and over the course of, well, the past 2 years, still ongoing. A result of that is that we had a first working version at the beginning of this academic year. So for that occasion, we both and as well as other people made pieces for the sort of opening concert. And my contribution to that was Wymall. So it was literally kind of like finish hanging the last couple speakers, get them all working, and then all those ideas you've been playing with for about a month, you have a week to make it work in this new space, and off you go. So
now, for our listeners who are not familiar with ambisonics, that allows for incredible precision in the placement of sounds within space, specifically because you're dealing with not just the X and the Y position, but also with a Z position to create the illusion of height. And so you can get essentially a 3D version of the audio projected around the room. But the problem with that is that you have to decode all of this information. So how did you handle the playback for a system like that?
Well, so part of our design with this system was it's based on the Grail system, which is the what we take into Bing Concert Hall and other spaces, which is already a mobile ambisonic system. So there was a decoder built for dome playback, and there was also one built for the listening room at Karma, which is an actual entire sphere space, and that. I might not have the channels correct in my head, but I want to say it's something like 42 channels, including the subs. But that is an entire sphere. So Nando had actually written the software, and it was a matter of updating the decoders to do the right thing for our new space. and we've actually gone through, that's been part of what we've been developing recently, is figuring out actually a multi-decode process for the space, because most of the information and most of the speaker placement in our space is on the horizontal. So we're actually doing a double layer decoder to kind of get the resolution that the speakers allow and the placement allows in the horizontal, but then with the dome, and we don't actually have speakers underneath us in the concert space. So trying to compensate for all these limitations. It's been an ongoing situation. In the performance that you heard, I made a decoder for specifically 8 speakers at the University of Oregon in whatever configuration they were going to give me, which was similar to what they said they were going to give me. So it actually worked out pretty well, but obviously use a lot of the height information because there's simply no speakers above us in that. There were no speakers above us in that space.
Right. Now, how do you go about composing a piece like that?
Yeah.
The ATK plugin for Reaper, or are you doing it in SPAT in a Max Patch? Or?
Yeah, no, it's ATK and the ICST tools. Those are sort of the 2 things. And then I was also doing some stuff in Super Collider. So I tend to do my synthesis stuff in Super Collider, and then I would just route it to the control matrices or the control stuff in Max, and then splay it out, see what I like, and just make gestures. I made hundreds of gestures, very short little things, 1 second to 3 seconds long, and recorded all those, then dumped them all pre-rendered into Reaper and started to build up sections of the piece. And then, I was using the ATK stuff in Reaper to do less precise stuff, because that's only 3rd order, the ATK plugins. So I was doing more like I want to create this sense of a room. So I'd be working with different reverbs and convolution reverbs, and then trying to create a space. So it's a buildup of a lot of different layers.
Yeah.
Right. And what you're creating with this is the representation of a room where the space is constantly changing.
That's the idea. And I'm glad you said that, because then it came across, or at least you believe the program notes.
I believe them more after having heard the piece several times now, both the 8-channel and the binaural recording.
The notion is something I've kind of thought about for years. Like, what if a space was dynamically moving around us? And I'm of course not the first person to think or bring this up. Lucier mentions it in his writings. Curtis Rode had mentioned it to me in one of our conversations. And it's just like this sort of notion, and I thought, what would be that experience? And so I tried to articulate that in this piece, and so I hope it sort of has that. It does. It certainly does in parts for me. It's not entirely that, but it does come across, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful idea, taking people on a journey, literally, or like as the rooms changes around them.
Right. Yeah, and like just this notion of like, what would, like, we think of architecture as being, constructive, solid masses, but if they were liquids and the laws of physics were different, what is that experience? Because of course, sound doesn't really care in which environment it exists. It's just it will do its thing. So that was sort of the thought experiment there.
Yeah. So our experience of this piece, or mine, not having gotten to see it in a concert situation, is as a 2-channel thing through headphones.
Yeah.
And so obviously it's a rearrangement of the same thing.
Yeah.
And listening to it on headphones, I get a lot of that effect, and I do think it's really effective. I have to imagine in a space with people being in different places around the room, and that the effect might not be such as stark. But so how was it in performance with in the space?
So actually, it's interesting to. Did you get vertical information when you heard it in headphones?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I mean, you did. So you didn't hear things going over your head.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no.
I look forward to listening.
Most likely not. I mean, it's really hard to pull that off in binaural. So I'm just always curious how it, because that rendering is based on a certain head transform, right? And it mostly works for me, but still, I mean, I sort of know the difference, and I've also memorized sort of the gestures, so it's hard for me to disassociate what works and what doesn't work in the binaural rendering. So I'm always sort of curious, like, how did your head do? We're shaped differently, right?
Yeah. Right.
But the live experience, it's like any piece of music, right? Like, you listen to a recording of a pianist in a concert hall, and you're getting one piece of information. You're getting the recording, and that has with it, the piano, it has with it the recording medium, and its artifacts. And in this case, you're not getting much of that space. You're actually getting, I have to look at which impulse responses I used, but you're getting a rendering for a completely different space than the one I made it in. And then that's being rendered down to binaural. So, it was sort of a compromise that felt about right to me. And yeah, it's certainly, more stark because you don't have the liveness of the room, and all the bodies soaking up sound and all that good stuff. So
other benefits of having the specific speaker sources and
and just live music's more fun. You can talk to people.
There's people next to you. You can read reactions and things
like
that. Yeah.
Well, but that's always a consideration whenever we're doing any type of fixed media piece, is how will this react when there are warm bodies sitting in a hall listening to this piece or not?
Yeah.
Hopefully not cold bodies, right? Yeah.
So,
depends, but
so one of the things we did to try and, so when we calibrate the system in the room, we've been working on this for a while. It's like, okay, we got to run the sine sweeps and build a impulse response for each speaker so that we kind of equalize it.
Nice.
And one of the things we did, this was Nando's brilliant idea, was to set up the concert chairs and then to put big pillows on them that were basically, sound absorbing cold bodies. And actually it changed the quality of the sine sweeps. I mean, like the resolution, well, it sounded better. So we convinced ourselves.
Nice.
Whether that's true or not, I can't scientifically prove it, but it was like, oh yeah, let's just simulate about the audience, so.
Nice. And you mentioned that you wrote the piece in a different space than it was performed.
I would work in the listening room downstairs, which is not fifth order. So I was doing, I mean, as with any piece, it's an ongoing thing, right? Like, I've been working on this material for years. Granted, only some of that material, that showed up in the final piece was things that I've been doing for years and years, so like there's those 30 seconds where it's like, oh yeah, that's that old thing. But putting it all together, I really did that on the stage. So it really was just like late nights of assembling it all together. But there was a lot of sort of working out gestures and pre-rendering, and actually sort of like, I consider it a sort of like getting to know your instrument. I would work in the room, and play back a bunch of gestures, and kind of spend 5-6 hours until my head was ready to explode, and then go away from the space and actually work with binaural reductions. And I could start to hear the difference, and then sort of map what it was going to do in the room. So some of it was working on headphones, some of it was working in the listening room, and a lot of it was just at the last minute putting it all in the space and making sure it actually worked right.
Nice.
So yeah.
Now, could you elaborate a bit on the gestures that you used?
What do you have in mind? I guess
Well, what do you define as being a gesture in the context of this piece?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's kind of anything from bloop, of which there are many, and then there's there's one thing where you hear like a ball drop into what sounds like a metal track. That was some sound sculpture I found. Where did Oh, it was in the Anchorage Museum. I was going to teach a class there, and so I went over to do kind of just a sound safari, and they let me in after closing. I walked around for 5 hours, and just anything I wanted to record, I recorded. So I just literally walked around this space with a recording device and like the whole space to myself, and just went crazy for a while. And that ball I think of that as kind of like that's a pretty clear, unadulterated gesture that, okay, there it is. And then that goes, and, I actually get to shape, because that recording was just mono. So then it's taking that mono source and actually shaping it across the space. The other, I guess, big set of gestural information in there is the Rayong playback. So there was a guy who was down in the studio recording all the different ways you could possibly play a Rayong in traditional gamelan music. And I took these he gave me a subset. So I had like, individual dunk, 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 all the different attacks. And I took these and 300 to 400 files and started creating super collider patterns that would play them back according to different logics that I can't recall right now. I have to look at the code. Yeah, so what was nice about those gestures is that it wasn't a sort of a pre-existing system. It was an emergent system where I was programming it. So I could say, this is the moment of playback, and I want it and put it in this particular space in the ambisonic sphere, and control the amount of reverb by this degree. And so that was all just algorithmically generated.
Nice.
Okay.
So
sweet.
Yeah.
Another thing from the notes that I wanted to ask about, you mentioned thanking for the mechanical bugs on the disemboweled and well-weathered piano, and also this all-pass group delay synthesis material.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about that.
Yeah. Okay. So the bugs, I might have one here. I'm looking to see if I have one. I don't. So it's basically a little motor inside of a plastic body, like about yay big, right? And it has
that is a standard 1/4-inch headphone adapter.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So it's it's just about that big, and it's got a rubber sheath on the outside, and then the rubber protrudes down into what would be little legs. Yeah. And so the motor is off-canted, so the thing just kind of moves around, and it goes, zzz, right? So we had a piano that was sitting outside. Sasha Lightman, who ran the Max Lab before me, and is now in New Zealand doing a PhD. She had left this outside, and of course, all the keys were gone. And you leave a piano in the sun and the rain for 2 years, and it has kind of wonderful properties to it. So we took out the harp, and we had this piano, and we just laid the harp down and put it on blocks, and so I could put microphones underneath. and then over it put a one of Nando's Sphere mic, which is a 3D printed homemade mic for capturing third order ambisonic signals. So I had that, and then I had all these spot mics underneath it. And I just let the bug kind of wander around and hopefully not get trapped somewhere in the soundboard of this piano. And of course, you know, like, it was just hours of fun. And then, you know, the other thing is that because this piano is, you know, sort of, well, it's naturally weathered, shall we say, you can do whatever you want to it. So like, there's definitely some baseball bat hits and stuff in there. And yeah, just a lot of exploration of what you can do with that. And so there's, Nando had this idea that we should have a collective composers sans clavier, where, you know, we all write pieces for this piano. And actually he did, I did, Natasha Barrett has some recordings that she's working on. There's Owen Callery does. There's a couple other people who've been sort of recording this thing, and it's sitting in a pile right now. If you stop by Karma, you can make some recordings, just reserve some studio time. So that's the piano. The all pass delay. So that's Elliot. Elliot and I have done several projects together, and he was working on this thing. I can't explain it, so I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to direct you to Elliot's research and say he can explain it in great detail. But for me, what it is instead of an impulse being, you know, all frequencies starting and then having their decay over time, he's programmatically shifting them to the before the impulse would have started and after the impulse would have started, and then determining the amount of decay and the amount of, well, reverse decay. So it fades in and it fades out. So if you imagine just a sine tone that goes, right?
So you're getting rid of the fundamental hit at that point.
Right, right. But you still have it. You have access to pre-time, right? Before that hit. And then, so there's lots of just ways of splaying these out with math. And so you get these kind of like wonderful things that just are their impulse responses of a sort. They have all the frequency content, but you've rendered them, and they do sort of weird things to sound.
Nice.
So yeah, I think I mainly used those as impulse responses in that piece. I may have even played a few, but I have to go back and like kind of dig for it to find out where exactly I placed it.
Nice.
Very cool.
Yeah.
We'll work, or we'll look for write up on that and include that in the show notes, because that sounds like a really interesting tool.
Sure. Yeah, I could dig that for you.
Oh, well, well, I can look for it too. But
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that is also kind of leads into another really cool piece using software to determine different gestures and then take those into music, which is, I'm going to butcher the name again, fluorescence.
Fluorescence, yeah. Sounds right to me.
Okay. Where what you're doing is you're taking video of smoke coming out of the bell of a brass instrument, passing through a sheet of lasers, and then getting
one laser
by a camera. Only one laser.
Only one.
Okay, how do they aim the laser then so that it's illuminating everything? Is it just
right? You're just getting a slice.
Okay, just a slice.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but then that is output as video, and then you use the cv.jit.centroid object from the cv.jit externals in Max.
Yep.
Which, shameless plug, that is a great library.
Oh, love it. Yeah.
Love it. So you're getting the vertical centroid and using that to determine the pitch that the trombone is playing.
Right. And also, I rendered the electronics the same way, but instead of, I just take out, I made these irrational overtone series, and I take out basically everything that the trombone could play, and having started at like 20 hertz and going up to somewhere over 20K. Everything that's left is what the sine tones are. So those are then determined by the same process, but it's sort of mapped differently. So it's not just an onset when it reaches a certain point. It's actually continuous drony stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because the sounds of the fixed electronics are really, really different. When I saw that you were building this out of sine waves, I was thinking it was going to be kind of a standard West Coast FM style thing. But then, yeah, the harmonics are all completely wrong for that. So
right. Yeah. So the way to that piece was I was in Iowa as a Grant Wood Fellow, and I was thinking about I was thinking about 3D printing, and I was talking to someone in the engineering department, and we basically talked me out of doing this 3D printing idea. And we were talking about patterns and how to represent them, and like, you know, sort of wide ranging, all over the place conversation. That was a lot of fun. And he's like, "You got to talk to my friend James. Like, I think you guys would have something in common." And so I did talk to James, and he has he has a laboratory where he has a laser, which is super cool. And he studies fluid dynamics. And so for him, like, and his son was playing the trumpet. He was just starting to learn to play the trumpet. So he was kind of interested in like just showing these sort of basic patterns that he knows exist already, but he hadn't sort of investigated what it was in musical instruments. And so he had done research like this when he was in Victoria doing his PhD, and had this sort of apparatus in mind, and had basically gone through the process once before, but he hadn't done it with an instrument. So we started, you know, basically trying to figure out how to do this. And so it was actually kind of it was a very improvisatory session. We basically took a big cardboard box and we cut apertures in it so that we would not get any of the dust. So as soon as you like turn out the lights and you shine a really bright laser, where you have to close the door and wear the special orange glasses, super fun. Then you start to illuminate all the dust in the air, and that causes like all these artifacts. So the initial sort of stuff was actually not very useful. And we're like, okay, this is kind of tricky. So we need to like get more dust out of the air. So we put it inside this cardboard box and we shoot the laser through. So like now you have this big cloud of smoke coming out of the instrument with each note. And then you put a laser through it, and then you shine the camera up at it. And now you have just a cross section that's perfectly illuminated.
Yeah.
And you can, you know, a super high frame rate, you just watch this unfold over time. So that was kind of the thing that got it going. The whole idea is that I'd actually make this into a real-time instrument. I still have not done that because that's a separate process, unfortunately.
Getting a whole audience with goggles.
No lasers.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. The other thing is that you need a lot of smoke, and so I was using a smoke machine, which inherently has its own sonic characteristic, which is a loud motor and a lot of heat. And so, you know, again, like traveling with this stuff and making things that you can take out on stage and that just work. Haven't solved all those problems. I'm still working on it.
But what instrument were you using for this? Was that a trumpet or a trombone?
Yeah, no, it started with a trumpet actually. And really, I think I made only like 7 notes. There's only recordings of like 7 notes. I mean, we would spend like, you know, 6 hours on 3 notes, you know, just like again and again, and like just getting the right shot. And then because, you know, we're taking like, we would do bursts of shots, and you'd end up like, it was something like 8,000 PNGs per, you know, 2 seconds. And so then you have to like concatenate these and find out what's sort of the right playback rate. Did you actually get you know, enough smoke? Did you get the camera focused in the right place? All these sorts of, you know, things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was an interesting process. And then so, you know, having done that, it became like sitting there making the piece in the studio. It was just as like painstaking, you know, like, okay, I got this like short little video clip. I'm going to sit here and figure out where the centroid is. Like, oh yeah, okay, great. Now I got this like little, okay, great. I got like 30 seconds of music. Awesome. Now what? You know, string these all together. You know, I have a bunch of 30-second things. Like, okay, 2 years later in my life, now what am I going to do with this? So.
Right, and that's something that you talk about in the notes to the piece, is that you had to override some of the centroid positioning in the max patch.
Yeah. So I have this, like, computers are great at doing exactly what they're told, and I'm not good at telling them what to do. But I am really good at following my ear and my senses. So I kind of like, I have this, you know, I guess it was more like 8 years ago, I was really good at breaking computers, like just kind of getting to their point where they start to fail and make these like wonderful things. Now the only way I can break them is to dump liquids on them. And that's not as effective for making art, that I figured out. But what I tend to do is make a bunch of material and then start to edit it. And so I start to find patterns that make sense to me, and sort of string material together in a way, and really follow, you know, kind of the years and years of musical training and aesthetic training that I have, and you know, override where I think it should be something else. So that's yeah, it took me a long time to be confident with that, because there's sort of you made this system, you generate this material, like you did all your work, it should just come out perfectly. But that's, for me, that's sort of not the right path. I kind of go back and forth very fluidly.
Well, that is always the problem with process-oriented pieces, is that if you create a process, inevitably you're going to have the process doing things and either falling into some sort of repeating state, or just punching out tons and tons and tons of data that has no musical use. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that works for some people, and you know, like, great. But for me, it's about, I mean, the whole journey of life and of art is to find interesting stuff, you know. And if you're not pointing at interesting stuff, well, I'm not sure it's worth putting on stage. You know, that's my sort of criteria for myself. It has to be something compelling to me at the end of the day, and something that I couldn't have come up with by myself. And so when I make a piece with a computer, I'm collaborating with that thing. You know, it's not a question of artificial intelligence. It's just, it's a question of this thing did this stuff, and, you know, then I react to that, and then I put it through sort of my processes inside my head and inside my muscle memory of what it means to play an instrument. And then I, you know, send that back through, and it becomes this loop of going back and forth between me and a machine. And the nice thing about fluorescence is that that loop is very explicit. Like, it starts with sound, it goes to video, and then it goes back to sound. And along the way, I mean, like, that's a very reduced way of saying it. I can break that into like 25 different steps. Each of those steps is an opportunity for the machine to do something that I've asked it to do, and for me to do something that I don't know to ask me to do. So we sort of provoke each other. And it's the same thing when working with humans. You know, that's why I work with performers. That's why I work with dancers. That's the whole point.
Yeah. One of my favorite things about this is the form you've arrived at, or through your choices of, like, there's a pretty long silence, like 2 minutes in, and it's like, it's great. and so many things like that happen, of the relationship between what you're hearing, what you're seeing. And also the relationship between the sound the trombone is making and the sound that's directly tied to the trombone, which the live processing stuff. Yeah. Where it's so smooth transitions between notes, and the relationship between the live electronics and the trombone can be so different note to note, and it's really, really striking. I was just curious, did I hear a trombone multiphonic mixed in there somewhere, or I mean, was the trombone player making that sound, or was that always just the trombone?
No, it was electronic.
Okay, yeah. So it's like there were a couple times in there that it sounded like almost like it was that, but yeah. But really blurred the lines for me with that.
Good.
So,
then it did its job.
Really, really nice.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. That's the great thing about having other people hear it. I didn't hear it that way at all. Like I'm like, no. Why would you? Oh yeah. I see how you can hear that. Right.
Yeah. But so many great choices.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. To be fair, I didn't hear that at all. I was just
good.
Focusing on the wave shaping. Sort of the bit reduction effects going on in the trombone part.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
And as with any of these things, like the only reason this piece exists is Mark called me and said, "Hey, I got a concert. I have a deadline. Go." And it's like, oh, what am I gonna do? I could write a new trombone piece. I got all this trumpet stuff. Trumpets are like trombones. Oh, I could use this. It's like it's the same dynamics, sort of, slightly different. And actually then it became this whole study in like, if I'm going to do this as a live piece, like, do I know this material inside out? So developing that trumpet, which is like in the closet over there, with like developing that live instrument, that I can do that, but actually to really learn it is it necessitated, in retrospect, I didn't realize this when I was doing it, but in retrospect, I know, like spending a year working with this material and really finding out what was possible. And it's for me, it's very strongly related to the dance pieces because I'm using the same process, but instead of a dancer in a room, I'm using smoke in a box. And so it just becomes, working with that. And so it's like, oh, now I can inherit all this sort of information and this sensibility of stuff that I've been working with. And as soon as I could put that together and I had a deadline, boom, off it goes. And then,
yeah. Now, on the subject of the dance pieces, you have quite a few of those where you're collaborating with a single dancer, multiple dancers, and live electronics. Like Sound Lines, which has such a extremely descriptive title for what the process is.
That's exactly what it is.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
So you're taking video from is that a Kinect or a webcam? I couldn't really tell in the
I go back and forth. I keep like, I'm gonna figure out the Kinect and I get halfway through it and then I'm like, I gotta finish this project. I've used both.
Yes. I remember there was a really, really cool presentation on the Kinect API at Seamus years ago. Back when they were first getting really popular, and they're like, here's how to do all the mapping. And I just kind of sat through that and went, dear God, no.
Yeah.
It's a lot of stuff. You can use it to motion track 16 points on 4 different people simultaneously, and the OSC routing looks like a page of code, and you're like, no. How do I do that for one?
Yeah.
But you're taking the video of the dancer, and then that is being reduced into just 2 horizontal lines that are essentially converted into waveforms.
Right. And so I actually usually, so I've done this with, so it started with Catherine with Sound Lines, and it starts with a single line, which is actually 2 lines, but you only hear one because it's the same line and the same pitch. And you just repeat it at audio rate, and you have this wonderful waveform, because the video matrix, of course, is just values between 0 and 1 when it's grayscale, and boom, off you go. So that first piece was very much an improvisation, like a very tight improvisation, where we knew we had sort of these 16 sections and we're going to go for this sound. And I, of course, being me, had like all this processing that I did on this sound to sort of get it into a different space. And so we would just go from chunk, 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 chunk. So we, move through all the different things. Later, when I was working with Becky a lot in Anchorage, and so that's when I started working with multiple dancers. Then it became more about figuring out how to manipulate the line in a way where I retained the correct information, but I also I found ways of getting different timbres out of it. So by smoothing it, you could get kind of a completely different sound. And then, well, now I have lines and I have them moving in vertical space. And if the person doesn't move, there's no sound. That was a step. Okay, so now we got on and off, and we have vertical movement. That sounds to me like kind of really early, like 16th century counterpoint. So I sat down and wrote out counterpoint exercises and figured out sort of like, I like these relationships of pitches over time. And that became a whole piece where it basically just implements, this set of two lines relationships to each other over time. I performed that like kind of 2 or 3 different times with different dancers. And then at one point, I was invited to do a solo set, and I needed material very quickly. So I was like, well, I have this stuff. I've always done it with dancers, but when I'm at home testing it, I sit in front of my computer and wiggle and, do stuff. Nice. And that makes the sound. So why couldn't I do that on stage? So I did a live performance where I put a camera there, and I just, I was doing a couple of things, but one of them was that, playing that counterpoint with, I think it was just like my left hand in front of the camera. So I, just kind of, and just make sound. And then my right hand was playing a monochord that I'd been working on. So I could, sort of do these 2 instruments simultaneously. And yeah, it's sort of this thing that I've internalized so much that it just kind of keeps coming up. So again, it shows up in Fluorescence, and then with the dancers, it keeps following this progression. And with each dancer, I get sort of more information because they play it differently. Yeah. As with performers, each pianist plays the piano differently, radically differently if you really drill in. So it's just kind of finding those spots and then making something out of that, making some reaction to that.
Nice. So I know, like, for singer-songwriters going on stage, they've got to learn to play and sing, or play guitar and sing at the same time.
Right.
Was it a challenge playing these 2 dramatically different instruments at the same time?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and actually one of the nice things that came out of it, like, I didn't really think about it as playing 2 separate instruments. I just start piling things on top of each other until I get the sound that I want. So like, with my pieces for instrument and electronics, there always ends up being this fixed electronics, and that's where I fix sort of the discrepancies, or I highlight the discrepancies between the 2 pieces of material that I've composed. And with learning to do this, it was like, okay, I got this thing that does it. Well, this is not enough. And then like, okay, now I have the monochord. Oh, this is a little better. And then, okay, this is starting to work. And there's actually like a few more layers to what that performance was. So it was like this, it's this coordination thing, but it was all things that I knew really well. So it wasn't a problem. And in fact, the thing that I love about that performance is someone came up to me afterwards and said like, wow, you're really like, you know, your Jedi performance, you're really channeling that. And I was like, wow, I haven't heard that since I was like 6 years old and Return of the Jedi came out. You know, it's like, it was a nice, like, yeah, of course. Yeah. That's totally what I intended.
Exactly. Nice. Well, sweet.
Yeah. Now,
go ahead, Ben.
With Solitude of Expression, that was the piece that you did with Becky Kendall up in Anchorage.
Yeah.
That one adds an extra dimension in that you have video being projected as well.
Yeah.
Was that generated from what you were doing in the Max Patch?
I was sending OSC to, I'm trying to remember his name. It's not coming to me off the top of my head.
That dude?
To a separate computer.
Okay.
What?
That dude that does the stuff?
Yeah. That dude that does the stuff who's now in Oregon. Wonderful guy.
Could it be Oscar Font, perhaps?
But he had basically these sort of abstract shape patterns that he'd worked out and had ways of performing with them. And so he was doing more like the clubby dance scene. And I was like, well, I can do some analysis of the audio and give you information and then pipe it over via OSC. So the video projection that you're seeing is an analysis of the audio, which is of course an analysis of the dancers, you know, and then because computers happen pretty quickly, it all seems to be happening, you know, simultaneously in the performance.
So this time we're going video to audio to video, effectively.
Well, dance to video to audio to video. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, the presentation, we were able to watch a clip of the performance of that in 2014 at that award ceremony. Yeah. And just the performance of that looks like it was a really cool thing.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it was. That was a pretty amazing space. And like that, it was in the context of all these other people getting awards. Yeah. So like there's all these great artists in the room and like that was the audience, you know, it's usually, you know, like these were the best artists in Alaska that year. And so they're all getting their awards. They're all happy. It's like, well, how can we make something that's like useful and meaningful to them?
Yeah.
So that was,
And you don't have to convince them that watching dance and video and listening to really, really wild sounds is art. Yeah. So good. Yeah. That's great. You shared with us a more recent work with a dancer, Michael Sakamoto.
Yeah.
And this is a very different scale, very different thing going on. Could you it's pretty interesting. I don't know if you could talk about it a little bit.
Sure. So Michael and I co-taught a class called Collaborative Performance at University of Iowa. And our provocation, or the whole point of the class, is that you stick people in different disciplines together in the class and make something. We had never worked together. We in fact met each other over the internets, much like we are doing right now. And after teaching the class, we're like, hey, we should really do this. Like, we should make a piece. And so Michael had this solo piece, which is kind of his life story. And it's called Blind Spot. And the things to say are that Michael's very, obviously very obsessed with dance. He teaches dance at the University of Iowa. And he's also obsessed with media in the sense of photography and how that relates to his work. And he had this sort of full show-length piece that he'd done as a solo work, and he invited me into it to basically kind of expand it out and bring things that I do to it. And that work's called Blind Spot. So one of the things, and the other thing about Michael is funk and Prince. Nice. And so we sort of share a lot of these things. You know, like we both grew up at a similar time, where, you know, like listening to Prince on the radio was a, you know, like moment in our lives. You know, like you're 7 years old and you hear Purple Rain, you're like, wow, this is a pretty cool world. Where did I land? So he tells this story of his life, and there's this moment where he's articulating the surveillance culture and sort of what does it mean that we are continuously online presenting images of ourselves. And so he does what he calls the selfie dance, and he has his camera and his phone, he's doing a selfie, and then he sets it down in a tripod, and that's where the audience realizes that I've sort of taken over it, because I now project, because it's a movie and dance, and then random dude on stage, me, making weird sounds every now and again. And so there's that moment, he sets it down, and all of a sudden he's in this box, and that's, you know, becomes this manifestation of the culture the surveillance culture we've built around ourselves. And he triggers the walls of the box by moving. So there's one on the left side, one on the right, and one on the top. And he, of course, can see it because it's a camera right there. And I just pick up the live feed from his camera and use that to, every time he hits a wall, I'm hitting a resonator bank, which is 3 different sounds. One of them is... actually, no, all 3 of them are from Prince songs, but they're just very sort of like iconic little, like he wanted very much like the Prince sound. And it's like, okay, great. Like, you know, there's this synth sound, here's a guitar, and here's him screaming, you know, but of course, when you do like a resonator bank, you're only doing a very brief moment. So you don't have the, you know, the changes over time. So you don't get that, but you do get like this fingerprint of it.
Nice.
So that is what that piece is.
That's awesome. Yeah. There's a couple technical questions I have. So if this is a video feed from his camera, was it him using a phone?
Yeah.
Was it wired, or did you get it wirelessly?
Video over IP. Okay. There's a couple of apps that'll do that. And then I would use JIT.desktop to grab the window inside of a web browser. And as you well know, or don't know, JIT.desktop hath gone away very sadly, which is why I love my old computer and my old Macs. For me, it's one of the most useful objects there, because you can, like, anything becomes fair game. For video.
Wow.
Is there any way to put it into something that you can send through Siphon into Max then, or?
There may be. I spent a week working on that, and it didn't happen. It was easier just to go backwards in Max.
Yeah, nice.
Unfortunately. That's, you're right. There's probably a way to do it these days. I just haven't, I don't have unlimited time.
Especially if you've got this old computer that does it. And,
Yeah.
Just before the show, Ben and I were having this conversation about getting new hardware, letting go of old things. And in my head, that's half the reason why I've got these old computers, is because they've got specific set of software on them that only works because it's deprecated and stuff.
No, I have in the closet, I have 3 or 4 old desktops that when I was doing research on Curtis Rhodes' work, he gave me to have the state of the computer and his Super Collider 1 code so that I could port it to Super Collider 3. Ooh. And the way you don't just need the code, you need the architecture and what it was referencing, and you need to pull all of that. So I have kind of these snapshots of different eras and time, different computers.
Yeah. Now, with the dancers, how much of their movement was pre-choreographed and how much of that was improvised?
it always is a conversation that that where we decide together, and it's much like when I rehearse a piece with a performer. You know, like, yeah, you're playing that crescendo, but you're not doing it right. Like, you need to do that crescendo, and it needs to sound like Chrysler when you hit the top note, and you need to have like that right amount of vibrato. You know, like, I need you to do exactly that thing, and the rest of the piece you're doing fine. I don't care. So with a dancer, it's very much like, yeah, that was all fine, except for like this moment, this moment, this moment. I really like this, or I really didn't like this. And then we just, you know, back and forth sort of sort through what they bring to the table and what I bring to the table. And I mean, with a dancer, I'm the external viewer always. I got very internal to sort of the sound process when I was working on sound lines, because we were collaboratively sculpting each sound. Like, I'm literally writing like faders and knobs to shape the sound and following sort of every movement to do that. And so I sort of enforce and I sort of reinforce and discourage things based on what's working sonically. And yeah, I wouldn't say there's, well, actually, I take that back. I can't say that. Solitude of Expanse does have a choreographed thing. And there are other pieces that I've done with Becky where they were very choreographed, but most of what I do with dancers tends to be, there's, you know, we're going to work in this many sections, do a thing for a while, and then do this thing for a while and this thing for a while. And so there is kind of a score. It's a loose score.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Improv within a framework that's
Yeah.
pretty specific. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Much like when I improvise with electronics, like, okay, gonna do this thing for a while, do this thing for a while.
Yeah.
All kind of going back to that jazz chart.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
Except I don't think I have a melody in there. Oh.
You can say there's a tune, maybe.
We'll do a pitch class analysis later.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this is an 045 set, and
yeah.
Well, so yeah, I feel like we're only scratching the surface of the kinds of things that you do and you spend your time with. You run the Max Lab, and it's just been wonderful reading about this and the kind of projects that happen there.
Yeah, cool. That's an amazing space. So, I mean, it took me a long time to get over the fact that I was running a space that Max Matthews started, and that was run by Sasha Lightman, who is just this amazing artist and amazing person who, you know, both of these people have taught me so much. And like, she is, I spent a lot more time with her than I did with Max, obviously. And they're both just like incredible people. And so, you know, you walk into this room and it's a candy store for us, you know, for people who make things and for make sound and, you know, who ask questions. So I had been kind of going in 2009, my wife was at Stanford and I was still at UC Santa Barbara. So for the last 3 years of my PhD, I lived in Palo Alto and commuted down to Santa Barbara once a week and back. So I go down for 3 days and then come back. And when I was back here, I would work at Karma, and I just ended up hanging out in that space and doing things. And that's very much what the space is. It's kind of somewhere between a lounge and a bar and a workshop. You know, it's kind of got all these things. And so it's very much a space where people will sit around and say, hey, Jetty, I want to make a 25-foot bonfire that comes out of the roof on demand. I'm like, let's think about whether that's a good idea or not, and then let's think about how to do it. So it's things like that. It's the space where you kind of throw stuff on the wall and see what sticks. Yeah, it's incredible. So I have a desk in there, and people come in and work on projects. And there's several courses that kind of pass through there for prototyping stuff. But most of what I do is just students who are working on projects. They want to do this thing, and it involves using a table saw and a laser cutter and something else they haven't used. And so it's, shop teacher, make sure you don't cut your finger off moment. Yeah. And also, a person who makes art talk about like, what is motivating you to do this? And is this the right thing? Yeah, you have this idea, and yeah, that seems really simple, but actually it's sort of complicated. But before we answer whether you can do that or not, let's find out what your motivation is and actually develop your piece, and then find the right tool to articulate it.
Yeah.
So
just because you can do something doesn't mean that that's the right way to do something.
Yes. Or it's and is it the right way to do it for your idea? Yeah. You may have seen somebody else do this thing, and that's really cool, but like, what's actually motivating your idea, your aesthetic there? Like, you have a very personal idea. What is that? And yeah, you're sort of latching onto this technology that you've seen articulated something close to it, but like, what's your statement, and how can we make that happen?
Yeah. Do you actually want fire on top of the building, or is it the sound, or the light, or the destruction?
So there's actually, I say that as it sounds like a joke, but so Karma is a historic building. It used to be the president's mansion, and there's 6 fireplaces on top of the building.
Oh, nice.
There's 6 smokestacks on top of the building which connect to fireplaces. They're no longer in use, and somebody has hypothetically proposed that it would be really cool to have flames shooting out. And of course, having watched and done my research on Burning Man, this is not rocket science. Well, it kind of is, but this is a thing. This is a genre, right? There are cars that do drum and bass with fire shots for kick drums and stuff, so yeah. Is it a good idea to do on top of Karma? No, probably not. Will it happen someday?
Switch over to Tesla coils instead.
Yeah, that's another one that comes up. Yeah, someone wanted to make a Tesla coil from scratch. It's like, well, let's talk about that. It can be done, obviously, but
yeah.
Is it a good idea?
Is it a good use of your time? And
yeah.
Is it, yeah.
Well, can you come out alive, and other people can come alive? It's a shared space. So,
how's your health insurance before we start this?
Yeah.
Well, sweet. So it sounds like a whole wide variety of kinds of teaching that require a pretty varied skill set of knowing how to not cut off your thumb and how to arrive at a good piece idea.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's, the thing about Max is that he was very much about demystifying technical stuff. And so that's part of what I've inherited as a responsibility. It's to take things that seem, and I can't possibly know as much as Max did. I can't know a very small fraction of what Max knew, but I know what I know, and I can, sort of embody that that spirit of opening things up and helping people solve their own problems. My experience with Max and with Sasha was not necessarily someone who would show me how something works. They would point me towards something and encourage me to figure it out. And support me in ideas and cut me off when it was a bad idea. So that was very much the sort of the thing that I took from that, and that is my job. I have to do that for people.
Yeah. Well, it's a cool kind of teaching.
Yeah, it is. I'm very fortunate.
Yeah. And it sounds like you've got some summer workshops that are as varied between Max MSP and visual stuff and Space Camp.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, of course, Space Camp is like, we finished a space that's about spatial audio. We're going to do a summer thing. Space Camp, please. Yeah, of course. Like the name came first. And then Sound and Art is, Elaine Buchholz is a visual artist who's done lighting for Laurie Anderson and Merce Cunningham. She teaches at Mass Art in Boston, and she was what is a sort of very prominent artist in San Francisco. I took a summer course with her and Sasha Lightman back many years ago, and I just wanted to revive that course. It was so useful and meaningful for me that I just reached out to Elaine and said, hey, can we do this? So we're putting together that one, which is just this provocation to find ways to help artists move forward in their practice across arbitrary discipline boundaries. And then the Max MSP thing is Matt Wright and I did a course last year, and people really liked it and wanted to do more. So like, can we do another week? And we're like, well, okay, we'll do that. We'll build that into next summer. So that's, yeah.
Nice. Yeah. For our listeners, Matt Wright did a cadence course. That was very, very popular. I actually audited it with a bunch of my students. That goes into just kind of this is Max, this is what it can do. Here's a bunch of things. Now start problem solving. Yeah. And what Matt does exceptionally well is teach Max MSP from the perspective of someone who understands computer science. And he teaches you concepts of computer science within Max MSP. Which is generally not a way that it's approached, in my experience. And Matt he's been in that program for so many years. He just has such a wealth of information. The week one course we actually do as we use the Cadenza course as it's a reverse classroom where you do that course online and then you come in with the questions and I've been banging my head against the wall and I'm going to make this project. Nice. So that's the way we've actually put that one together. Is to leverage that because those lectures are so good. Oh yeah, I still pull out his lecture on just versus equal tempered intonation.
Yeah.
With his demonstration on the oud.
Yeah. My experience of going through that course was he was developing it when I first started at Karma, and so he would be like showing me patches and stuff, and then at the end of it, I watched all of them, and I would just listen, and then he would say something absolutely ridiculous that was hilarious, and so I record all of these, and so I have a whole library of just Matt saying waka waka waka, and like things like, because he says all these ridiculous, like whenever you talk to people, you tend to say ridiculous things if so so I have a whole library of wonderful stuff from that.
Nice.
So that's going to become a piece eventually, right?
Last year I gave it to the students for their final projects in the Max course, and one person did incorporate that. Yes, someday it will be in a piece, of course. That I probably do with him.
Yeah. I'd love to have that as like just a soundboard for a radio show. Waka waka.
Well, that was kind of the way the class happened, actually.
Oh, yeah?
We would be talking and then he would say something and it would just like trigger. And so I would just like bring up the sound file because it was all right there.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
Yep. Just map those out to QNEO and you're all set.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I guess so. We've talked about your music stuff, your audio stuff, your work with dancers. You shared with us some of your other installation work. There was one piece in particular, Ice Walkers. It was a pretty cool thing.
Yeah. So that is. So when I was in Anchorage, I worked with a group called the Light Brigade, and we did a lot of large-scale ephemeral installation site-based work. and maybe I shouldn't even say installation, just ephemeral site-based work. And that could take the form of sound, things, actions. And so that was a really wonderful sort of space for me to work in. And it helped me sort of like get over a lot of the distinctions that we have between different, I guess, categories of thought. You know, like this is a sculpture, this is a sound piece. Like it's sort of irrelevant, right? Like at the end of the day, you're doing a thing in front of another person, and you're either on the stage or in the audience. You know, like impress me. You know, that's it. Go. You know. So with Ice Walkers, University of Iowa had a flood, several floods, and they lost their art gallery. And in their art gallery, they had, well, yeah, they had, you know, lots of priceless artworks, and then the flood came and they had to take them all out. Mm-hmm. And so they had this one giant space that was there, and the building had been condemned, and it was now being shared between the props department for the dance and or costumes and props for dance, and then the new museum, which didn't have a space because they couldn't bring their artwork back into the space. But the director of the museum said, hey, you guys as the 3 Grant Wood artists, like if you want this big space to work with, here you go. So we had it, and I was like, okay, great. What am I going to do with a painter and a printmaker? Like I'm, you know, like how do we do this group show, right? Yeah. So my solution was Ice Walkers, where I took, so this is a huge concrete space. I forget the dimensions, but I mean, the 25-foot ladder you see in the space really looks small, you know? And yeah. And you know, like you really, like the scale of that space was massive, and it's all, you know, like stone. So like, yeah, let's put some sound in there. Like, yeah, that's really going to work. So what I did is I put a speaker behind one of the openings. And so you get this background sound layer, and then you get direct sound layers. The background sound is recordings of walruses that I made in Alaska when I was visiting the island where they haul out. It's escaping me at the moment. I'm sure it's in something I've written someplace. But my wife and I went out to this island, and we were there for a week, and it was just us and the walruses and a park ranger. And we would just go on hikes, and I would record stuff, and then we'd make food, wake up, go to sleep, make recordings. You know, that was it. And it was really just like this awesome experience. And it's like just these animals like hauled out. So they haul out means they all just get on the beach and they sit there and sun themselves, and then they go in and eat for a while and come back. And this was all the males. Like all the males go in one place and all the females go in another. So I had these recordings, and I was reading an article that they had moved from their haul out space from one place to another, and that this was part of the problem now is that the distances that they have to cover are so great that their population's going down, and this can be directly tied to climate change. So I was like, okay, well, we have climate change data since the 70s. I'm just going to use that to control what you hear. So you get an increasing, you know, the less the amount of walrus, the less you hear them. So the installation begins in the 1970s, and you get kind of this overwhelming, very direct sound, and increasingly there's more reverb, and they become more and more obscure, which is what's happening. And I haven't checked in a year, so I can't give you an update. But there's that, and then so how do you then sort of articulate the role of ice? Icebergs are important to these guys too, because that's also where they haul out. So that was another thing. So I wanted something about sort of the glaciers, and that suggested to me some sonic things because I'd done recordings of microphones frozen inside of ice. And in this case, I took a giant ice block and I put it up 20 feet in the air. And as it melts, it hits a big metal pan, and there's a contact mic on that. And that becomes this other layer to the piece. So, you know, it's just kind of going on through time. And so that sort of narrative plays out throughout the piece. The other thing about that is that I didn't want just the ice dropping sound. I wanted to actually process it in a way to make something that made more sense to my ears. So I built these long pipe containers, which I put a horn driver against, and then the sound of individual drops comes out these pipes. So when you walk up to the piece, you can go to a specific pipe and hear one sound, and then as you move over here, you get a different sound. So it becomes this thing that you have to sort of interact with. You don't really know what it is. It sort of evokes the language of these big tusks because it's got these big white things. Yeah, so it's just pulling together a lot of stuff. And of course, the final component is that I took blue chalk and drew a big outline around it so that people wouldn't get too comfortable inside it. I didn't want them to like climb the ladder or something. So I thought this was a good way to demarcate. And also like kind of reminded me of like when they used to trace chalk around dead bodies in old film noir. So it's kind of that thing. So.
Dead / dying.
yeah. And that somehow worked with a painter and a printmaker.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the questions I had was about the tubes / tusks. Was that going through a computer, or was that a direct process from the contact mic to the drivers in the tubes?
Yeah, no, definitely through a computer. There's a single contact mic, and there's I believe there's 2 sound worlds. I have to double check. There's like sort of the direct thing with some delays that's changing, and I forgot the logic for that, but it ties back to this narrative in some way. I just don't remember at the moment. And then there's ones that are pitched, and those that pitch material is just like resonator banks, and also the tubes, because of their material and their length, they have a certain sonic quality. So it was about, you had to tune the system.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so it's like, I think there's like 6 channels of audio there. So yeah, it's all coming out interface.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sweet. Does that piece still exist, or was that there and no longer?
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it. I can remount it, of course. But it was so specific to that space. It's very hard to think about it just traveling to some other place. I have to go in and kind of figure out what are the acoustic properties of that space and make it work.
Yeah. How to tie it to the meaning local to the space and things.
Yeah, because acoustically the piece needs to work, and it needs to work in a way that's not, I mean, one of the big problems with sound installation pieces is that they're often in your face, and if somebody's got to live with that, like people who work at the gallery or someone who buys a piece and has it in their house, like how do you live with that sound, right? Like, is this a sound you can live with? And I think, there's people who just don't think about that, right? But for me, it's important to go in and figure out something where it does work. And so for that show, I was actually walking around with my phone and just kind of adjusting the level. So like, as there was more wine in the room and more people talking loud, I could bring it up a little bit. And like when people chilled out, bring it down. So it's like, it's very much about adapting to the space and the people in the space.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another level of tuning.
Yeah. Of course.
Nice. Well, sweet. Well, yeah, this has been a great conversation. I think we're at like an hour and a half already.
Affirmative.
We
Yes,
are.
we are.
Yeah, so I guess we should probably go on to the last parts of the show. I guess, yeah, first we could do this each month. I'm gonna say month in air quotes as the schedule's
It's
going
not
on.
been a month. You already told me that.
Yeah.
We're
Well,
breaking
before
form.
that, we went over a month.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just
Yeah.
catch up. I see.
Life happens, and
Yeah. Yes, it does.
yeah.
Life happens. Final exams and grading, unfortunately,
exactly.
happens.
Yeah. But so this episode 45, we've come to the point in the show where we do the 2-minute challenge, and I went last time, and we're trying to keep it alternating now again. So Ben's up, and Ben,
I am.
yeah. What are you going to talk about this time?
Well, our producer Dave actually suggested something this time.
Yeah.
I believe it was freaking theremins, man. How do they work? Something similar to that on Slack.
Yeah.
And so, being a theremin enthusiast myself, I figured I would do that. I did not bust it out for this. That would be way more than 2 minutes of playing around and making sci-fi noises and going, oh, here's my impression of Clara Rockmore trying to do the swan, and oh, I can't do it. Yeah, well, because I don't
that
practice.
takes practice. Yeah.
But yeah, so I will be discussing theremins this month.
Sweet. Do you have a timer? Because
I've got a timer set.
Okay, cool.
Actually turn my volume up on the old iPhone.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go.
All yours.
So, created by the Russian electrical engineer, cellist, and inventor Leon Theremin, the instrument that bears his name works on the principle of heterodyning oscillators to produce a tone. 2 ultrasonic radio frequency oscillators, generally somewhere below 500 kilohertz, are inside the pitch circuit. One outputs a steady fixed frequency, and the other is sending a nearly identical frequency that changes based on the proximity of the performer's hand to the antenna. Here, the performer's hand is basically acting as an electrical ground because they're hopefully touching the ground. I have no idea if this would work in 0G or not, allowing the hand and the antenna to function as a variable state capacitor. By varying the distance of the hand to the antenna, the 2 oscillators are going through voltage changes. The circuit changes, creating an audible change in the difference of the 2 oscillators, which is very similar to binaural beating that is filtered and amped before being output. By default, this is generally an exponential scale corresponding to the pitch. The further away you are, the larger the distance between 2 semitones. But you can alter this by modding the circuit and really carefully tuning the oscillator when you're setting it up in a new room. In fact, there are kits available for the popular Moog models that will help you do this and get a more linear playing. The amp circuit is much simpler. Again, the hand and the antenna function as a variable capacitor, but here it's paired to a fixed circuit that's outputting at a steady rate. By lowering the hand, capacitance on the circuit between the antenna and the performer increases, lowering the output of the steady circuit, which thus inverts the volume. So as you bring your hand closer to the antenna, the volume gets lower. You combine the 2 via an amp envelope, and you're ready to make spooky sci-fi noises or embarrass yourself trying to play it in class like I frequently do in my intro class. And there we go.
Done.
All right, stop playing. There we go. So that's theremins. They are, I will add, kind of going through a resurgent right now. Obviously, Moog came out with the Theramini a couple of years ago, which is what I have. It's got the Animoog digital engine controlled by analog oscillators, so you can get more than just spooky noises. You can get super crazy noises.
Yeah.
And then if you want to, you can easily hook up the CV outputs on the Moog models to a Eurorack synthesizer and get even crazier noises. So I like to take the pitch output or the envelope output and put that into the FM input on my oscillator and get really crazy swoopy things when I hard sync the oscillator. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I was I found it pretty interesting just to learn the way the oscillators worked in the theremin. It wouldn't, yeah, I had never thought to look up how exactly that worked. It was pretty neat.
Yeah, and it's one of the few electronic instruments where I can actually understand the circuit diagram.
Right? Yeah.
I'm like, hey, I can read this.
Yeah. Well, sweet. Good job. Thanks for doing that.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
we'll have to wait until next month for your next challenge.
Yeah, indeed. Next month in air quotes again. But well, thanks again for joining us on the show, Christopher. Do you have any other works coming up besides your your summer workshops? And I know you might mention that you've got a talk coming up in a couple weeks.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's been really wonderful. I am going to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan next week for ICAD, the International Conference for Auditory Display. I'm presenting fluorescence. So I'm giving a talk on that piece and also performance of it. So nice to be in the Midwest for a week in the summer. And,
indeed, I still wouldn't jump into Lake Superior next week, though.
Yeah. But I am going to bring a microphone and plop it in. So
good.
Get some recordings. It'll be fun. But yeah, that's all I got going. That and just 4 weeks of teaching around here and finishing up the stage this afternoon. We're going to go put in. It took us a year to find subs for the stage, and so this afternoon I'm going to be lifting 100-pound subs, all 8 of them, into place and building stands that are made out of steel that just shipped. So that'll be an afternoon.
Put on your manual labor hat. And yeah,
I do it from time to time.
Definitely the steel-toed boots too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. Well, cool. Yeah, thanks again so much for sharing your work with us, and it's been great to learn about everything you do. And thanks for the wonderful conversation.
Thank you guys for the great conversation. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks. Well, this has been another month in air quotes of Patchin, episode 45 wrapping up. Thanks for listening. You can check out the rest of our episodes either in however you get your podcasts, or if you go to soundnotion.tv/PI, that's where we have the show notes and links to everything that we've talked about. Soundnotion.tv is also where we have other shows in the SoundNotion network, and also a couple places where you can donate to support our cause of putting on shows like this. Yeah, thanks again for joining. My name's Nate Blyton.
I'm Ben Furman.
And we'll see you next Air Quotes month.